Hello and welcome everyone to our speaker series. Today we're going to be speaking with Dr. Harsha Rajasimha. He is an incredible person at this juncture in our lives to be speaking with here at the NDF. He is an expert in genomics and he's a data scientist with 17 years of experience in precision medicine. This is a very emerging space in the healthcare universe, and he is extraordinarily accomplished. He's a social entrepreneur who has founded several organizations, but they each focus on accelerating therapies for rare disease. He's the founder of the Indo-US Organization for Rare Diseases. He is the founder of the Rare Diseases India, and most recently he has founded Jeeva Informatics Solutions, and that's what we're going to be talking to him about today. Harsha, welcome to our speaker series.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure to have you here. We want to hear upfront from you what separates Jeeva from other patient registry platforms.
Absolutely. The biggest thing is data ownership, right? So patient groups are the rightful owners or stewards of the aggregate patient data. And that's when they have the most leverage in collaborating with multiple research organizations, multiple pharmaceutical companies to accelerate therapy for the rare disease community that they serve. So we put the data ownership squarely in the hands of the patient groups that we work with. That's the biggest differentiator.
And so you're saying that others don't do that?
Most of them don't, especially the ones that are free and that provide it as a resource. They do give ownership to individual patient records to the individual patients, but then the aggregate data of all the patient together, that sometimes it's skewed. You have to be really careful in reviewing who has access to it. You may have access to it, but they may also be selling it, and they may be transparent about it, but you need to read the fine print to know exactly how the data is being used.
In general, it's a good saying that if the product is free, you are the product. So
absolutely.
You need to be very much aware of that. So
yeah, that's the biggest differentiator. The second is we bring all the pieces of logistical coordination, the email, SMS, electronic informed consenting, educating the patients, multimedia content management, all of those in a single login. The patients and the researchers have one place to go to log in. That's the other second differentiator. You can there are other platforms also which have a single login, but they don't bring in the email and SMS and other communication capabilities, which becomes a nightmare from a logistical coordination point of view. Imagine sending a reminder text message to 300 patients individually from a cell phone, or managing a WhatsApp group where you have to respond to every single message that comes in. So you can do all that with a single click and save templates and manage those communications, etc., in a single login.
Perfect. I mean, that seems like a really good solution, because I know that it can be quite labor intensive managing patient registries. So I guess we're excited to hear you make a presentation now that goes into the details that you just sort of went over, and so that we can evaluate whether or not this is something we want to use here at the NDF. And if our patients feel good about it, then it's something that we're considering. So thank you in advance for your presentation, and I will sign off and turn it over to you.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for the opportunity, and I'll dive right in. We have a lot of material to cover today, and I'm going to be talking about accelerating the relay from patient registry to clinical trials to long-term follow-up studies, and then back again. So it's a full loop. You start with patient registries are often the first step in the rare disease therapy development process. So I'll be hitting home quite hard on the importance of having the right data and starting early, and how that can help with the drug discovery and development process. So the key takeaways of the talk today will be to make sure we fully recognize the value of patient data in therapy development process, critical considerations that one needs to go through while selecting a software tool for patient registry or a natural history study, you have to think long term, because these are at the very foundational elements in a long journey of getting a therapy done. Think of cystic fibrosis, right? It took 35 years before we had a therapy for cystic fibrosis, but the registry work had to begin decades before we had a therapy in the market. And then even beyond that, right? So having one therapy is not the goal. Really having enough therapies to address and improve the quality of life on an ongoing basis. So this is very long-term. And then accelerating the clinical research process. So I'll talk about why and how clinical trials are the most complex endeavor undertaken by mankind. Then strengthening the digital engagement. And it's not all about technology. Technology is a critical enabler, but human touch needs to be balanced with digital. Between strengthening the bond between the clinical researchers and the patients. They are the key stakeholders. So for me, most of my work, the inspiration comes from within my family. I lost my dear brother about 3 years ago to a chronic disease that he battled since his childhood, and the therapies that worked well could not sustain his life. He passed away in his 30s. So that's when I decided to develop Jeeva as a technology platform in a human-centric fashion to accelerate all aspects of rare and chronic conditions. So when you look at the patient data and journey with a rare disease, most patients with rare diseases remain undiagnosed. We know that, the average time is 5 to 7 years. And then once they get a diagnosis with a disease that has a FDA approved treatment, which is about 5% of all rare diseases, we know that, right? Then they are lucky enough to now, then the question is, how do we access that therapy? Is it affordable? Is there a way I can access that? Then, if the patient is diagnosed with a disease without any of FDA approved treatments, then you have to look at, is there any ongoing clinical trials that this patient can enroll with? And then if beyond that, it's the long-term follow-up, right? So how well is the therapy working? Whether it's standard of care or a investigational therapy in clinical trial, how did it work? And what are the side effects? What are the long-term implications and such? So diagnosis in the early stage, patient registry and natural history study is where most patients have to begin, or the patient groups as a whole in aggregate. And then that can be a very important foundation, as they can form a control arm or have provide a patient's self-control data before treatment and after treatment during the clinical trial, and then long-term monitoring. So currently, roughly about 2,000 rare disease trials are registered in the clinicaltrials.gov database. So given that background, when you look at how patient data can drive research, patients and caregivers are the experts in their diseases, and they are more than just subjects in clinical trials. We know that they are critical partners. Without patients, we can't really advance the therapy development. Now, that involves interventional trials, phase 0, 1, 2, 3 trials during investigation and post-market, or it could be observational data collection studies such as patient registry, natural history, or real-world evidence, once it's out there to gather more on a population scale. For a variety of disease or medical conditions, right? The focus today is rare genetic diseases, of course. And then there are also other types of studies like biospecimen collection, biorepositories, diagnostic studies, those types of things. So irrespective, the process of bringing a new therapy through regulatory approval is probably the most complex endeavor undertaken by mankind, right? If you look at all the moving parts, the complex scientific, molecular aspects that come up during the discovery, early R&D process, and then the animal model studies or other preclinical studies that have to be done before any first-in-human trials are approved by the FDA, say starting with a investigational new drug application. Then getting the regulatory approval is a 6 to 7 year process from that point onwards, right? So it's a pretty long, complex, cumbersome process involving multiple stakeholders all working together, and that's what makes it very complex. It's not a equation in physics or math that would you know exactly what to expect. There are a lot of variables. The biology is complex, medicine is complex. You need to generate evidence to find out whether it's safe enough and effective enough to be approved. And no surprise, 9 out of 10 therapies fail in these clinical trial process. But a lot of that cannot be changed, but a lot of it can also be changed. And where are those opportunities and gaps to really optimize and make this process better? That's where I have been focused on for the last several years now. So if you look at in the preclinical, non-clinical space, that's where the patient registries and natural history studies come in. It's not just the lab work that's important or the animal model work, but creating enough understanding of the patient data early on. Do not wait until a phase 1 trial or a actual gene therapy trial is starting. You need to start the registry and natural history study way before that if you want to really accelerate this process. And then beyond that, after the approvals, gathering real world evidence, because think of gene therapies that are costing $1 million or a couple $1 million per therapy, one-time therapy, right? But how do you know whether it worked or not? You need to, the payers are demanding evidence that the therapy is actually working in this particular patient. Even if it worked in, say, 90% of the patients during clinical trial, they need evidence that it's working in every single patient before releasing $1 million in reimbursement. So for that, obviously, you need to monitor for the long-term safety and durability of that therapy. And that's the only way to do that is to have digital tools. Patients do not have the incentive to go back to a clinic once they have received that one-time treatment, right? So why should they be expected to go frequently to the clinic unless there is a need? And that's where digital engagement can really help. Now, looking at the patient registry as a type of clinical study, right? So any study that involves human subjects is a clinical research study, and patient registries are no different, right? So, and they are very useful tools to collect and manage high quality data, are more guided when the research agenda for the therapeutic area and the patient population are very clearly defined upfront, right? What type of information do you want to collect? How do you collect that information, and who is collecting that data, whether it's patient self-reporting or caregiver reporting or a clinician making that assessment, right? Where do you store that data? Is it in an encrypted secure location, or can it sit on anybody's desktop computers, or how do you store it and encrypt it and transmit it, and whole disease areas that are covered. So you need to look at, do you only want to focus on one specific disease or a group of related diseases? What's your inclusion exclusion criteria? So if all patients in that registry are going to be homogeneous with a very specific diagnosis, then you want to be clear about all those things upfront. And then natural histories are a natural progression of a registry in some sense, in that you may have demographic and contact information in the registry. Now you want to collect more clinical and deeper data about their standard of care, what are the unmet needs, that type of thing. And so that becomes a natural course of progression of the disease in individual patients. Now, having this is very useful as control arms for interventional clinical trials that can result in FDA approvals. And so this is very valuable data to start collecting and thinking about. Now, those are all the types of studies that come before you get into a human clinical trial with a investigational therapy, whether it is antisense oligonucleotide or a gene therapy or a small molecule drug or a injectable biologic, right? So either way, you have a lot of background data about the patients, the disease, the natural progression. Now, during the clinical trials, it's no different. You're still doing the similar activity of enrolling specific patients into a specific study. So one thing we did is, we went out and interviewed 2,000 stakeholders of clinical trials. And one of the things we heard is every clinical trial feels like the first ever trial undertaken by mankind. And every single time you have the same set of issues, and they don't seem to get better and better, right? So in fact, the cost of developing drugs has gradually declined or is becoming inefficient, right? It used to be about 700 million a few years ago, a decade ago. Now it's more than $2.5 billion, the average cost of bringing one therapy to market. That's just simply unsustainable. And so we need to now look at what are the common issues that affect every single trial, and how can we address these logistical issues, right? Because we can't just say that every trial is different, and so let's just focus on this one trial. And that's what has been causing all these delays and cost. That's what we have done with Jeeva, which I will talk in a bit more detail. And then after the phase 1, 2, 3, and you also need to remember that these are no longer hard sequential phases anymore. There is like phase 1 and 2 can get combined, or 2 and 3 can get combined, or you go straight to phase 3 without 0, 1, or 2. So there's all sorts of FDA has innovated in the regulatory space. So that whole gamut, you need to look at how the interventional trials are done, and finally after they are approved. Now, if you look at any single clinical study involving human subjects, they all have to go through this long and complex process, right? Starting with design of a protocol, exactly what are the primary endpoints, secondary endpoints, what kind of protocol amendments may be necessary. You need to anticipate and avoid any such protocol amendments. Then site selection. Where do you want to conduct this clinical study? Is it going to be virtual entirely, or do you have one or more physical sites, university or a hospital site? And then regulatory approvals that you may need before starting the study, and that ties in with where the studies are located, which countries they are located in, and then configuring that study, and then patient recruitment. Now, in rare diseases, especially if it's a life-saving therapy, patients are willing to travel the other side of the planet to gain access to it. So it's many times it's not a problem to find and recruit patients for many diseases. However, there are 5 different biotech companies developing gene therapy for the same disease, let's say. Now, you can't have the same patient participate in multiple trials. So, you are running out of options when you look at 90% of these clinical trials happening in the United States and Europe. You need to find more patients willing to travel from other countries, because most of the patients already identified in the Western region are already enrolled in some sort of a trial, or are not eligible for one or the other criteria. And then you get into clinical assessments, follow-up visits, patient-reported outcome data collection, reporting results back to patients, and the regulatory submissions, right? And so that's still a lot of moving parts and variables. A lot of things can go wrong. So you have to, it's a very controlled process. And that whole thing can take 6-7 years. And currently, total of all diseases combined, about 88,000 clinical trials, but only about 2,000 of them are specifically focused on rare diseases. So many of the people we interviewed included biotech, pharmaceutical, clinical operations folks, CROs, hospital sites and research coordinators, principal investigators, patient advocacy groups, individual patients who went through clinical trials, regulatory experts. And we gathered various perspectives, and we learned that even within a given biotech or pharma company, the medical affairs does not know what's going on in R&D necessarily, and the different departments and disease areas. Some innovation that happened in rare disease group is not known to someone working in oncology. I'm talking about these large 100,000 employee companies, right? So there is all these disconnect, and it's no one person is a decision maker many times, right? So even though they have a title, it's a group decision and a collective decision. And so there is a lot of people influencing what goes on. And many times decisions have to be made because it's time to make a decision rather than making the right decision. So when you look at the big problem, what we heard is patient enrollment is the #1 problem, which is average of all diseases, not specific to rare, and only about 3% of all eligible patients actually enroll in a clinical trial. And many of them decline because either they are afraid of being not receiving the treatment, they may be placebo, or fear of side effects, and many other. But there's about 1/4 of them decline because of the travel burden and the logistical burden. And that's a very addressable problem, which has remained unaddressed for a long time for various reasons. And think about every day delayed. Of course, it costs many patients' lives many times, but also it costs a lot of time to the sponsors. Every day that drug is delayed in getting the approval. So when you look at the challenges that patients go through in accessing a clinical study, finding the study in the first place, then coordinating travel, missing work and taking time off, finding childcare for their children, or finding a caregiver for their the traveler. So it's all a lot of logistical burdens there. And when 9 out of 10 trials fail, then they are terminated many times because of low enrollment, and there is a blame train that begins, right? So what went wrong? Who did it? Why couldn't we start it the right way? Right vendor selection, tool selection, site selection. Somewhere someone has to be blamed. And so if you look at how clinical research studies are done today, there's a lot of burden on the study staff. They have to toggle between their email, SMS, and the informed consent process, patient-reported outcome data collection, questionnaires, and a lot of it is still paper-based, and some is electronic. So you have to toggle between a lot of different moving parts here. That's very inefficient and time-consuming and thankless job that the clinical study staff have to do. Now, when you look, so that creates a huge opportunity for creating a integrated, aggregated platform where all of these tools can come together in a single coherent login. So that's what we developed at Jeeva. You only have a single login for patient or the study staff to log in, and they would see all the functionality in one place. And then it's highly scalable. You can, when you think of N of 1 clinical studies, like the Mila or JASI, those types of studies, or any patient can start collecting their own individual data comprehensively using Jeeva, or it could be a population scale study as well, with tens or hundreds of thousands of patients using it at public health context for a COVID-19 trial even. So that kind of scalability is very important. And then you have and that should be not something you decide when you start. You can start with 10 patients and then you go on adding and growing that study as well. So it should be scalable at any time. And most importantly, in the context of rare diseases and patient group-led studies, data ownership is very critical. When say patient registry is sponsored by a third party, they often like to gain control over the aggregate data. They'll say individual patients, you have right to opt out and take your own data, but the aggregate de-identified data is something that owned by the sponsor of the registry or a clinical study. So you need to make sure as a patient group, you are the most motivated to accelerate the therapy development process. So by paying a small price for the right tool and managing that registry yourself, you can avoid heartaches, and more importantly, your vision and mission to accelerate the therapy for your disease, you will end up losing that. And so that's one of the biggest considerations there. And obviously patient privacy, security, data security is all crucial. And then the other part is, does it work on any device, right? So you can't expect everyone to be using a very specific, like iPhone to participate in a study or a registry. And even someone who accesses from iPhone should also be able to access from a laptop or a computer, iPad, or Android phones or any other device. So that's what we designed Jeeva to be, a browser accessible device system. So patients and staff can access it from the convenience of any device from their home. That's how it works. And we are working towards making this a user adaptive design. The user interface can automatically adapt to adult or child, for example. And it's modular in that you don't need to use a sledgehammer for all studies, right? So depending on your study, you may choose to choose Trial Magnet as a package that comes out of the same Jeeva eClinical cloud, which is a comprehensive suite of all the modules and features. Now you can build your own package depending on your need. If you are working on a patient registry, you may need, eligibility screening, informed consent, and a drag and drop form builder where you can build surveys and questionnaires to collect specific information, like electronic patient reported outcomes. Or if the clinician is making assessments, you can choose to do the eCOA, the clinical outcomes assessments module. And then the omni-channel enrollment, you want to be able to enroll patients from text messaging, WhatsApp, Facebook, any group. So the system needs to be slightly open in a secure way so that patients can get into the system from social media channels and other channels. And then enabling that bidirectional communication between study staff and patients by email, SMS, and multiple channels. That's crucial. But if you choose to add additional packages like uploading lab reports, which may not be part of most studies, but if your study involves patients uploading a lab report or a video, like a 7-minute walk test or any other type of file formats, that's very easy to add such modules in the Jeeva system. And we are working towards a bidirectional video conferencing module that will be available later this year. But the rest of the modules are available today. So when you look at starting with protocol design in any clinical study, you want to start thinking about the primary and secondary endpoints, the inclusion exclusion criteria, and how to avoid any amendment of protocol, because these are expensive. If you change the protocol during the course of a study in any significant way, it may require you to go back and reconsent the patients all over again. And so you want to design both your informed consent form as well as the protocol in as much foolproof manner as possible by anticipating possible changes that may have to occur in the future. So it's better to take a few days upfront to get those right than to rush through the initial process and then it's way more expensive later on. And all the logistical considerations that we discussed. Now, these can be effectively leveraged for patient-focused drug development that the FDA has been advocating and championing, right? So we are all aware of the rare disease patient listening sessions. Now, only when patients speak up and express their point of view, the protocols can be designed right and protocol amendments can be avoided. And the logistical consideration, many times we don't think about the detailed logistical issue of travel and the paper versus electronic, and whether this needs to be requires a patient to travel to the clinic in person or can it be done remotely. Sometimes it cannot be avoided, and that's fine, but you need to be really thoughtful and deliberate about all those aspects. So I'll skip through this slide. It talks about why patient-centric trials are very important, right? So it can really improve the chances of study success. And everybody knows this, but yet these are still not as common as we like it to be. But we are seeing the value. As you can see, the likelihood of a drug launch is significantly increased when it's done in patient-centric protocol designs versus non-patient-centric trials. So there is opportunity to make this happen at scale, right? So that's what the Jeeva platform's vision is. Now, this is the most critical logistical considerations slide, right? So when you look at the informed consent process, it needs to be truly informed consent, right? So it's not just, hey, sign here. If you like to be part of the study, sign here, right? So it's about informing the patient about what data is collected, why it is being collected, how it will be used, how it will benefit you, and how it will benefit the community at large in advancing science, medicine, and how it will help patients that will come after you. That's all part of the education that needs to occur before a patient can be expected to consent or not consent, right? So, and to do that in clinic, in person, is always a safe and best thing to do from a compliance standpoint, because the institutional review boards appreciate that. They consider the informed consent very divine, right? So nobody wants to rush through that process, and every physician investigator wants that, right? They want to make sure the patient understands and is comfortable. But imagine explaining the same protocol, same issues over and over again, one patient at a time, to thousands of patients or hundreds of patients. Significant repetitive duplicate tasks that can be avoided if it can be done properly, effectively, where patient can review all that information from their home on their own device. Everybody saves a lot of time, energy, and it's even better because physicians often are time crunched, and they may have to get it done in 10 minutes or 15 minutes, the average time of consultation. But if patients can watch a 30-minute video, read the PDF, have the ability to ask questions with the study team remotely, and then make a determination, that's great. Similarly, questionnaires, whether paper-based at a site or from home. So I have placed these diamonds intentionally in the middle. So for every study, the study team should ask the question, what is the right positioning for this diamond for informed consent questionnaire, etc. And the tools that you select have to really be flexible enough to enable you to make these adjustments, right? It's not just on the slide and on a piece of paper, but in reality, to make this actually adaptable and flexible in a tool, so you can actually run the study. And this may have to change, right, in 1 year, 2 year, 5 years, because these are long-term studies. So you have to really think from that point of view. And that's exactly what Jeeva does, is providing you the flexibility to address all these different considerations, right, at the study operational level and the software or tool specific selection level. We went over all of this, and this is just a summary slide. I'll leave it on the screen for you to grasp. There is a lot of detail here, but you get the idea, right? So a lot of thinking needs to go into this. And ultimately, it's the people, process, and technology, right? It's not just technology, and it's not just the people. Everyone has to follow a very strict process, because these are regulated environments, right? So there's GDPR guidelines in the EU and HIPAA here. And while certain nonprofit patient foundations may not necessarily come under HIPAA, you still have to maintain the security, privacy, and respect the participants that are in the study. So we went over the patient enrollment problem. And when you look at patient recruitment initially into the registry, you have the eligibility screening and make sure you identify matching patients for your study. And then once you have the matching patients, you need to then enroll them into your study, getting the informed consent. So you want a tool that can help you get through these steps as quickly as possible from multiple channels. And then once they are in the study, it's an ongoing effort. It's not a one and done, right? So you got the enrollment done. Now you have to keep them engaged. They have to respond to surveys. They have to respond to follow-up visits, answer any questions, respond to emails and text. So it's an active bidirectional engagement going between study team and patients throughout the study. And that's critical for retaining patients in the study long-term. So when you look at the Jeeva eClinical Cloud platform and the Study Magnet package, it's built in that modular fashion, and that helps you with faster patient recruitment, reducing the logistical burden by over 70%. We estimate that you can speed up the enrollment process by 3 times faster with doing everything electronically and in one place, right? And but you can save cost as well in terms of any sample collection visits, whether the patient goes to the site or or a phlebotomist goes to the patient home to collect samples. In either case, you can reduce a lot of the cost and the logistical burden, minimizing the patient dropout in clinical trials, and better user experience for everyone involved, right? So patients, of course, but also the study team, they take quite a bit of burden on their shoulders. So if in a Jeeva study workflow, you go through study configuration, communications, screening for eligibility, getting the informed consents signed and reviewed, patient-reported outcome data collection configuration, and there is a patient-facing act, right? So that's the biggest value, is we really address that gap of engagement between study team, patients, right, on the same platform for all activities that needs to occur in the course of a study of any kind. So the process is very simple. There is no installation. There is no app you need to download, right? You basically go to a browser-based, a browser URL that you receive invitation by email, and that's generated within minutes, literally, where an administrator from Jeeva creates a study account. Now the study administrator can then create additional study users. Now any of these authorized study users can then start configuring the study, bulk import patients from an Excel file, start communicating back and forth, right? And then once they are ready for informed consenting, you can kick off that process. You can define an automatic drag and drop workflow for what are the steps involved in enrolling patients into the registry itself or your clinical study, right? And because we developed this keeping FDA regulated interventional clinical trials in mind, which is highly secure and stringent from a 21 CFR Part 11 compliance and all the regulations like SOC 2 and various other data security, privacy, GDPR, and other compliance. Patient groups don't need necessarily that level of regulatory compliance, right? Because they don't come under FDA regulations. So we created a lightweight package which has all the similar security features, but not as much unnecessary burden from a cost and management standpoint. So that's something we are able to offer nonprofit foundations at a very reasonable, affordable price. So I'm happy to give a demo of the product, or someone from my team can arrange this on a one-on-one basis, or anyone that might be interested in. So happy to do that. So in summary, the Jeeva eClinical Cloud is primarily focused on patient recruitment and retention in long-term studies, whether it's one patient or multiple patients, large number of patients, and evidence generation, patient reported outcomes, real world evidence, that type of thing. So it's really a single all-in-one integrated platform that can enable patient groups, researchers, CROs, biopharmaceutical companies, and public health organizations. So happy to discuss more with anyone who is interested with that. The key takeaways from today's presentation is that we saw that why we need to start early with patient registry, natural history study, or any patient related data has to go start even before any animal model studies or preclinical studies in that phase itself. The sooner the better, so that can actually help guide experiments and protocol design. And then the critical considerations while selecting the right partner for designing and implementing and maintaining a registry or a natural history study, which can run really long term. And then various strategies to accelerate clinical research by minimizing the burden on patients and study teams at various levels, from protocol design to site selection, patient recruitment, retention, evidence generation process. then strengthening the digital engagement with a human touch, right? So all of these are guided by closely listening to thousands of stakeholders who told us how they have been running studies for decades and where are the inefficiencies. Almost everyone we spoke to were frustrated, and we have made the best attempt to address all those frustrations in this platform. So we have a couple upcoming rare disease events that are already on the calendar, like the Orphan Drug Congress or the Global Genes Rare Summit or the NORD Summit. And obviously, we're already starting to plan the Rare Disease Day for next February. So thank you for the opportunity today to speak to you all. Lali, thanks for the opportunity. And Rachel, appreciate inviting me today. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Harsha. That was a wonderful, elegant, and informative presentation. If anybody has any questions about this, please contact us at info@cureGNEM.org. And we are especially interested in patient feedback. We will circle back with results, and Harsha will speak to you shortly. Thank you again, and we'll see everyone next week. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.